In a world where creators are wearing the mask of being a true professional, there are some people that just want to take a camera, give it a lens, go to a place that they've never been before or somewhere they go all the time and just get the shot. They want to find compositions, they want to find colors and different lines and different angles that they like and that are unique to their style, and help them feel something, help them feel like the very reason why they got into this in the first place. I don't necessarily think I needed to travel across the world in order to get that feeling again, but for all intents and purposes, I wouldn't have it any other way. All right, let's get comfortable here. Now, if you guys like these kind of samurai pants, I do too. Now, LUMIX sent a bunch of creators and myself out to Osaka, Japan to test out the Panasonic S9. We're all pretty much given a long-term loaner, but they actually gave me some lenses to test these guys out as well. So I figured I'd just mention that. Now, right off the bat, the S9 is an incredibly small camera. It's actually way smaller than I thought it would be. I think where the whole theme of this camera launch is going is actually not necessarily going for professionals, but really going for those content creators or beginners or people that just want a quick camera that they get photo and video with. But just because it's super small doesn't mean it's not very powerful. It has the same sensor as the S5 Mark II. It is a full frame sensor. It's capable of shooting in 6K, and you're also gonna get 24 megapixels for photo as well. But one thing on this camera body that's a little bit weird that we'll talk about later is that you don't actually have a headphone jack. Now on the DJI Lav Mic 2, I could always monitor my audio on the actual receiver, but for other solutions, you might not be able to monitor your audio, which I think is a little bit of a miss, even if this camera is not necessarily made for professionals. Speaking of things that are made for professionals, this also has a micro HDMI instead of a full-size HDMI, which helps reduce the size, but overall, I think especially for that target user, they don't really care about using a full-size HDMI to monitor their image with. Something I didn't know I needed until I got it was the ability to have flexibility and choice on how I want people to see my images. OpenGate just hits differently. It's something I haven't seen in any other camera that I've used before, much less because I've tried to avoid it because I didn't think I needed it. And I still don't think I do. But the fact that we have the choice to show how we want to tell our stories, I think is something that gives a lot of power, but at the same time needs to be used responsibly. One of the things I like about this camera is that it still has the S5 II sensor, so you can still shoot in 6K OpenGate. Now, there's only two reasons why you might want to do that. One is if you're an anamorphic snob and you need more resolution from the top and the bottom, and two is if you're someone that likes to make content for different platforms. If you're someone that likes to make vertical content, or you shoot 9:16, using OpenGate actually gives you the ability to recrop and reframe for whatever you so choose. If I'm somebody that likes to make YouTube content and Facebook posts, and I want to make some verticals as well, if I'm someone that makes content for YouTube or Facebook or TikTok, I could use the same shot and just reformat it using the higher resolution in order to make that happen. I don't necessarily think a lot of people are going to be using anamorphic for this camera. I mean, there's going to be a couple people. However, if I'm somebody that likes to make content on the fly and I don't want to have to re-record myself for different platforms, I could just use OpenGate instead. Now, one of the things that LUMIX got a little bit of a bad rap for was going to be its autofocus, but they've done a new firmware update where it actually works pretty decently. I mean, I have no idea how well this works as I move farther back, but as I move around the frame and as I've been using it as kind of a vlogging camera and other things, I found that it actually works pretty well. It sticks on my face. I can see the little yellow box over here, and it actually does a pretty good job. So for a camera that works really well with vloggers and content creators, people that are making fast turnaround stuff, having a reliable autofocus actually works quite well. If I misfocus at any point in this video, you could just tell me, and if I misfocus at any point in this video, you could probably just leave it in the comments. And if I misfocus at any point in this video, you could probably just leave it in the comments because you'll let me know. Now, another thing I want to talk about is going to be real-time LUTs. I've actually been using on the S5 IIX and as well as the S9. Now, that's not necessarily a new feature, but on the S9, they've added a couple of new things. For one, you can actually use two LUTs at the same time in the S9, but you're going to be able to have room for using a conversion LUT than using a finishing LUT on top. Sort of like some of the workflows that people do to convert their vlog into Rec 709 and add another finishing LUT on top. You can also control things like your saturation, your sharpness, and your noise reduction as well to dial in the image that you want. Now, that's all fine and good, but there is one more thing. LUMIX has actually added a new app called the LUMIX Lab. Now, this is a really powerful tool, especially for you guys that want to be able to use LUTs, adjust them, and share them with your friends. The LUMIX Lab app, you're able to upload the videos directly into your phone, and you have to use that 4K light if you want to adjust the image on your phone, and you could actually re-export some of those edits as LUT files directly back into your camera. That means that if you do get a couple of clips but you want to make a few adjustments, you can either choose to post that right away, and if you want to mimic that throughout a bunch of your shots, you could actually send that back to your phone and continue using it like a real-time LUT, just like you did while taking it from your computer. On top of that, there's also going to be a little bit of a social aspect as well. People are going to be able to share their LUTs on the LUMIX Lab app, sort of like when you had to go on different forums or different user websites in order to find things like recipes on Foodie X106. But also you could take those recipes or emulations or just LUTs if you want to call it that and put it back on your phone and use it for photo mode as well, which also means I'm going to have to make a couple of new LUTs for the Panasonic system, and at the time of this video it might not be up, but if it is, I'm going to leave it down in the description down below. Okay, so one of the crazier things that LUMIX is known for is its in-body stabilization. So right now I'm on an 18mm, I've actually turned everything off. I'm gonna go through a couple of clips in terms of different stabilization modes, and that way you guys can tell which one works right for you. So this one is the normal operation stabilization mode. So if you turn the camera on yourself, maybe you're shooting at a wide angle just like this one. I'm sorry, I'm gonna move out of your way. And this is pretty much how it's going to look. It doesn't shake too much, but also we're shooting super wide, so everything works really well. Now there is something called the E-stabilization or the electronic stabilization mode. Now this one won't crop in, but it does add some extra stabilization in comparison to a previous mode when it was off. Now when that same E-stabilization mode is turned on to high, it does have a minor crop, but this is actually a pretty stable kind of movement. And you tell me if you see any wobbles in the screen, because right now I'm looking at the lens and not at the corners. And this is with IS Boost. Now there's even a more stabilized stabilization feature on this camera, which actually crops in even further. This 18 is now like a 30mm almost. I'll put some of the crop factor down below in terms of how far this is cropped in, but if you want the most stabilization out of the LUMIX S9, this is what you're gonna be looking at. Okay, the light might have changed, so did my outfit, but the content stays the same. Juin found a way to make a light that used to be a lot bigger, a lot smaller, and their brand new X60 light. Now this guy not only is going to be powerful and bicolor for the size that it is, but it's also a full RGB light as well. And what's also cool for a lot of people that are on the go or content creators and vloggers, which kind of makes sense for this video, is the fact that this also has a rechargeable battery as well. It's pretty easy to set up, you just put these two together and you can power this light off of this battery. Now, if you don't necessarily like the battery life coming out of a smaller battery like this guy, or you have a longer shoot, you could also do power delivery and charging via USB-C. This actually gives you the ability to actually charge this light off of V-mount batteries, making it an easy and compact setup, which I use all the time for some longer video shoots. Now this does have its own proprietary mount when you get it, and it does come with this reflector that's on there, but you could actually get this adapter that can go on the X60, so I could use Bowen's mount diffusers and softboxes on this little tiny light. In fact, I'm actually lighting this video right now by using one of those. Now I'm in the middle of moving, and trying to get content while moving at the same time is difficult, but having a light that's easy to set up, that's really adaptable and bright enough to work in any situation is actually gonna be really handy. And you're also gonna see them when I move into my new house with the new studio, which is gonna look really cool. Spoiler alert, I'm already here, but let's try a lighting setup using two of the Molus X60 lights. Now, right now, I'm gonna just have my key light on the softbox I showed you guys that before, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn on some practical so I have some motivation. Now, this looks all fine and good, and we still have some light on my face providing some key. However, it's a little bit out of sorts. On my face, it probably looks a little bit blue. That doesn't really match up with the orange lights in the background. This is where you could use the ZY app on your phone in order to control the lights on your cell phone, so that way you don't have to go behind the light and actually change all your settings. So let me just go ahead and do that. I think, right about there. Now there is one more thing I'm gonna do, is I'm gonna give myself a little bit of edge off the background. I'm actually gonna use a second X60 in order to do that. So this guy's just gonna go somewhere off of frame, and it's gonna light up the background and help separate me from the back of the wall. Now this light over here is actually going to be full RGB, so I can mix around with some of the colors in order to give me a different effect of whatever I want to get to create some contrast. I think I'm just gonna stay right over here, but both those things you could access on the app. A special shout out to June for actually sending me these lights. They're really nice, they're easy to travel with, especially when you go all the way to a completely different continent in order to get some decent lighting, but we'll just go back to Japan now. Now, the S9 didn't inspire me just to get quick video content and document my trip, but it also really got me into shooting photography again, which is something that's rare. The 24 megapixel sensor is more than enough for me to share videos on different platforms between Instagram or even in YouTube videos as well. Recently, after using the Fuji GFX 100, I've fallen in love with using the 65:24 aspect ratio. Now, you do have the ability to get your raw photos with the full resolution in post, but at the time of this video, I don't have access to those RAWs. I was using the 65:24, which I find is a very cinematic type of aspect ratio, but paired with the real-time LUTs that you get at a camera in photo mode, I did really like these a lot. On top of that, if you do want to use things like your grain adjustments in your photo modes and burn it into your JPEGs, you can do that on the S9 as well. I have no idea how this audio is going to go and how long it's for, but for the rest of it, just enjoy some of these photos. Capturing a story is an all-day affair, not just when the sun is up, but also when things get a little bit dark. Some people think they've adopted the dark, but some people are born in it or molded by it, which I think is a Bane line, but I just want to talk about low light and sound kind of cool. Now, in terms of low light capability, the sensor is still going to be the same as the Panasonic S5 Mark II, which means it's going to have a dual base ISO at 640 and 4000. Now, this is still very much my first impressions of the camera, but while I was walking the streets of Osaka and Tokyo, I didn't notice too many noise and artifacts on this camera. Now, what's nice about this is that if you do notice any noise, especially in your higher ISOs, you can always go into some of your real-time LUT menu settings, and you can change your noise reduction to whatever you want it to be. This is also nice to mitigate some things in camera, just to make sure that things are exactly what you want it to, and some of the things that it might not be as good as, say, like a Sony system. At 4000 ISO, you could bring that noise back, or you can do it in 640. Now, one thing I don't recommend for content creators to go shooting out in the dark all willy-nilly. If you want to see a video about shooting in low-light situations a little bit better, I'm going to leave a video right over here. Now, this is all fine and good, but the LUMIX S9 does some things that might not be a great thing for yourself, and there's some things that I definitely don't like. Now, number one is going to be establishing the fact that it does not have a headphone jack. Now, whether or not you're a professional vlogger or just a content creator, having the ability to monitor your audio is essential. I could give up on crappy visuals if the audio is decent, but one thing you really need is the ability to monitor it, and not having a headphone jack built into this camera might be a little bit of a miss in my opinion. Another thing this camera does not have is a hot shoe on the camera itself. Now, cameras like the A7C II and the ZV-E1 have the ability to communicate with other accessories like microphones or lav mics, where the S9 does not have the capability because it's just a cold shoe on top of there, which means outside of a microphone, there really isn't any other functionality to it. On top of that, the two things that might get on the nerves of a lot of professionals is the fact that it does not have a mechanical shutter. Now, for a lot of people that are kind of starting out and don't care about things like rolling shutter artifacts or dealing with flickering lights in your photography, this might not be a gigantic deal. However, in some situations where you are working with lights that aren't necessarily film lights like these, you might get some flicker and it might not be able to be mitigated while not having a mechanical shutter, which you might be able to do a bit better while you're doing it in photography. Also, not having mechanical shutter also means that you can't mount a flash sync, which the fact that it doesn't have a hot shoe anyways kind of is nor here nor there. It kind of is par for the course, because even if it did have a flash sync, there'd be nowhere to mount the flash onto to begin with. Another thing on this guy as well is the fact that there is a record limit, but there's actually a reason why. Now, when we asked Panasonic, or we grilled Panasonic about this, was the idea that if the camera does overheat, it's not going to be functional. So one thing they wanted to do was basically save us from ourselves by putting on record limits, so every 10 minutes or 15 minutes, you're going to have to press record and restart that clip. Now, for people that make short form content, YouTube videos and such, this might not be a big deal breaker. For me personally, the 100 some odd videos I've made on this channel, I don't really have any clips that are 10 minutes long. Now, there are some people that want to do things like podcasts or longer form content. This might be a deal breaker, and in fact, this camera might not be for you, which is totally fine as well. Now, the last thing that might be a deal breaker for you, might not make this the camera for you, is the fact that its live stream over USB-C is non-existent. One thing that I really like about some of the compact cameras, like some of the Sony a7 series, is the fact that you could plug in a USB-C and you could use the camera as a webcam. Not only is this great for live streaming, but it does also make your Zoom calls look kind of cool as well, but the Panasonic S9 doesn't have that feature via USB-C. It's not as easy. You're still going to need other adapters and cables for it, but I wish that was just something that was in camera to begin with. Also, things like having one SD card slot and the fact that it does come in different colors, which might be a turnoff for some people, doesn't bother me because a lot of the compact cameras have one SD card slot, and personally, I like my red colored camera. It's the closest thing to a red camera I'm gonna own in my house. If you know, you know, but I like it personally, and I think it adds some individuality to your camera kit. Now, this video is getting kind of long in the tooth, but I'm going to end it off with price, who I think this is for, and the whole consensus around some of these press tours when new cameras are released. Number one, this camera is $14.99. I'm just going to cut to the chase. There's no other full-frame 6K open-gate camera that's at this price point. Are you going to lose a couple of things in terms of its body design and some functionality to get a smaller camera? You definitely are. However, in terms of getting high-quality video footage and still being able to mount audio, even though you can't monitor it as good, you have to use an external speaker, you're going to get more than what you need in terms of a device that can make content quickly and on the fly in photo and in video. And other cameras in this price point are either going to be significantly more expensive or just unattainable, and that's looking at everybody who has a Fuji X100VI, who's probably waiting until next year to actually get one. Overall, who I think this camera is going to be for, and it's also based on this trip itself. There was a couple of other filmmaking and pro photographer creators that were on this trip, but I would generally say it didn't make up a majority of the people on this trip. A lot of the people that were here are people that make a lot of short form, quicker content and don't necessarily make content about professional cameras and professional video cameras. In general, they were content creators just like who this demographic is for, without having to talk for some of the professional capacities of some of the cameras that are available, which I think is more than fine because, to be honest, I think if you're someone in pro video or photo, this might not be the camera for you. It is missing a couple of things that people are used to. My general inclination, especially in shooting photography, is to lift my camera up and use something like a viewfinder, but that's not available on this camera, albeit I just had to get over it in a couple of days, and I still had a lot of fun with this thing. On top of that, some of the video features are there, which some Sony cameras don't have, shutter angle, but there are some things that are missing from a professional video camera, like having a headphone jack that might be a deal breaker for some people that want to use this for professional videography. Generally speaking, if you're someone that likes to make content and someone who makes making YouTube shorts or TikToks or YouTube videos, for example, around other things that isn't just pro filmmaking and photography, I think this camera is very useful for them, and based on who showed up to this trip was very reflective of who they were going for, which also might not be the person watching this video, to be completely honest with you. Last thing I'm going to talk about is the general consensus around some of these press tours, and the fact that, A, I'm not apologizing for going on some of these things. It's kind of nice and also very humbling that a brand is willing to send you out to Japan or California or wherever the case might be in order to give your opinion on a new product that they've worked very hard on and released. If we're going to keep it a stack, if you owned a business where you had a networking event that was open bar and free food, and it brought in people that could help your business, either giving you positive feedback to other clients or constructive feedback in order for you to make the product better, you'd probably invest in the resources to do that if you had the ability to do that with hundreds of people. And one of the things LUMIX said directly to a lot of us was the fact that it's not necessarily saying something positive or negative, it's the fact that we say something at all. If you had that same networking event and people came and drank your drinks and ate your food and left and never spoke to you again or never spoke of you again, you probably wouldn't invite them back. And I think a lot of the trips just like this are exactly that. Some of these press trips, yes, gives you an incentive to speak positively, because going on a trip to Japan with a new camera is a lot of fun. But you could also have just as much fun with any camera under the sun. But the S9 was one that we used, and I actually enjoyed using it quite a bit. However, for some of these camera companies, they want the feedback, whether it's positive or negative. We had things that we disagreed with LUMIX on, we had things that we agreed with them a lot on, and when we got a sense of where they were coming from with the S9 release, it made a lot of sense in who they were going for, which, to be honest, and I'll say it again, might not be for you, and that's perfectly fine. Now, people that have a problem with some of these videos or think there's an implicit bias in terms of the camera to say something positive, But objectively, this camera shooting 6K, being small, having different colors and built-in LUTs is gonna be true whether I say that in the streets of Tokyo or in my backyard. For the most part, some of these videos are meant to be taken with a grain of salt. Find out what the camera does, find out if it's useful to you. If you wanna buy it, that's great. Links in the description down below. If you don't wanna buy it and it's not for you, that's totally fine, because every single camera that's released doesn't necessarily need an insertion from a trained pro in order to give an opinion whether or not it's a good or bad camera. Believe it or not, there's more than just us that exist. Now, that being said, I enjoyed this trip, and a special shout out to LUMIX for sending me on it. They didn't ask me to actually make a video or anything at all, but I decided I wanted to do this and share my experience because this is a camera that made me forget about being a seasoned professional in any direction. It's a fun camera, comes in different colors, there's a lot of things about it I really like, a couple things that it kind of missed and it could do better, but that's only look forward and see that there's more improvements going in the future. Now, if you're someone that took any value from any of the specs or any of the features shown, well, you can check out more in the description down below. And if you don't want to see that or it doesn't work for you, that's fine too. But what might work for you is one of the videos I'm going to leave on the screen. And if that doesn't, well, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.